Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'm going to be bringing you guys an updated version on what I think is by far and away the fastest rogue build in the entire game. If you're interested in just absolutely blasting all the way up to level 100, while also actually being able to clear unbelievably quickly at level 100, even in like tier 70 to tier 80 nightmare dungeons, this is going to be the build for you. The damage potential of this build is just unbelievably high. It also just works very decently right off the bat. You don't need any crazy gear or anything. We are going to be taking advantage of some of the Malignant Hearts, which I will go into detail about, but I mean, as you can see, the damage is just unreal, and I've just been having an absolute blast. Keep in mind, this build is not necessarily made for doing very high nightmare dungeons. I'm actually going to be making a tier 100 rogue build pretty soon, probably be uploaded in like a day or two. And this is also not meant for killing Uber Lilith. This build is entirely designed to just absolutely speed farm the ever-living crap out of the game while just nuking everything on screen as fast as humanly possible. Do keep in mind that this build has one downside, which is its boss damage. You're not going to do very high damage on bosses because they are not crowd controlled, and a lot of your damage does not work very particularly well against bosses, but outside of that, everything is pretty much perfect. Before I get into the build, I want to show you guys a fantastic way that you can discover and try out brand new builds with today's sponsor, Mobalytics. Make sure to check them out completely for free with the link down in the description. You can just download the app entirely for free onto your desktop, and it's a fantastic way to discover brand new builds. Shout out CC Cleaner. For example, I've been wanting to try out a Necro Minion build, and I just now am getting my Necromancer leveled up, so I could very easily just open this up and see, okay, what are some of the legendaries that I want to be looking out for, make sure that I need to get a good Ring of Mendelum before I can actually set the build up. I can also see what is the stat priority on my gear, so I can make sure to look out for certain things, and you can also very easily just copy all the skill points, etc. You can also check where it is within the tier list, so I can see this is an S tier build, so I'm really more interested in setting it up. But also, these builds get updated constantly, so you can very easily just check the list here, and these builds are updated all the time, and you'll even find new builds here often. And you can also sort the build not only by tier, but also, by a whole bunch of different categories. So for example, usually I'm very interested in speed farming builds, so I'd very easily be able to just check that out. They also even have their own build planner, which is amazing for multiple different things. You could just, plan your entire build right here and just have it set up. But another thing that's great about this is, particularly, I forget which legendary aspects I'm missing sometimes because there's just so many of them, and I just want to remind myself of all of the other options. So for example, on gloves, I could just go here and look at all the different utility and offensive aspects for myself that it's not very easy to find in the game. So the build plan is fantastic. You can plan out the entirety of the skill tree, entirety of the Paragon Board, etc. And when you download the desktop app, you will also get the in-game overlay, which is a fantastic way to also view the builds. And even while you're in game, you can just look at this druid build, for example, and I could be looking at gear in my character screen, which actually it merges perfectly, which is just very clean looking. But I can just tell, okay, on helmet, I want all stats, armor, blah, blah, blah. So it's very easy to see while I'm playing in game without having to look at another monitor or anything what I'm actually looking for. So definitely make sure to check out Mobalytics, download it in the description, completely for free, and thanks to them for sponsoring today's video. Getting into the build, like always, the whole build will be posted over on the website, so feel free to just check out the link in the description. If you don't want to hear my stupid face talking and you just want the skill points, Paragon Board, legendary powers, stats on gear, yada yada, all of it will be over on the website. I'm going to go into decent detail with the reason that we're using things if you want to know about different skill options, how the Barber Heart works, and how it impacts the build, because there's a lot of caveats and weird intricacies and things with this that I will go over with you guys, and also just give you more options. But again, the website link is there to just easily copy. I'm super close to 200k subs, so if you like the content, I'd appreciate a sub. But anyways, let's get into it. So the crux of the build, basically my goal with this build was to be able to just fly through maps as quickly as possible, level up as quickly as possible, while retaining a massive amount of damage. One of the ways that we can do this is that we're actually converting all of our single target damage into AoE damage with the Wrathful Heart of the Barber. This has a lot of weird things going on, which will be timestamped, and I'll talk about all of those things for those of you guys that actually care. The main thing that you need to know about this is basically you're converting any damage that you do to one target into a big AoE explosion, and that damage is then therefore going to be increased. So this not only gives you a massive just overall damage output increase, but it's going to massively increase your clear speed, because single target damage is now AoE damage, which is one of the reasons that I'm now using cold imbuement, which I typically stay away from. Cold imbuement is great for just increasing your single target because you pretty much instantly apply freeze, and anytime an enemy is frozen, you're going to do massively increased damage to them via Frigid Finesse, via one of our glyphs. But also cold imbuement inherently just gives you extra damage against chilled or even just crowd controlled or frozen enemies. Pair this with Shadow Imbuement for further enhancing our AoE capacity, just nuking the entire screen with Shadow Imbued skills. Also, It's unclear if the Barber Heart actually just does shadow damage inherently, or if just using Shadow Imbuement makes the damage count as shadow. All I know is that when a Barber Explosion goes off, you basically get advantage of consuming shadows just infinitely. If there's 10 mobs there and one Barber Explosion goes off, everything will die and you just get full energy, so that is crazy value. Also, the vulnerable application with Blended Shadow Imbuement just pairs perfectly with Barber as a result of some of the downsides that Barber has. And having 2 imbuements is just amazing when you're using Death Trap. So Death Trap is great because it is an ultimate skill, and then it has a very low cooldown of about 30 seconds, but you can further reduce it a little bit. But it also pulls enemies in, so when you're just nuking down one target, you can pull all the enemies in and then nuke everything because you're turning that single target damage into a big explosion. You can further reduce the cooldown on Death Trap by using Preparation, which is a key part of the build. Every 100 energy that you spend reduces your ultimate skill cooldown by 5 seconds. They actually buffed it to 6 seconds. So essentially, we stack a ridiculous amount of attack speed with the build so that we just spend energy unbelievably fast, and we're getting so much of this energy back with some of our base regen, but also because all of our kills are giving us Consuming Shadows value. So we get our Death Trap back very quickly. So we basically initiate combat with either, Cold Imbuement or Shadow Imbuement for extra damage or extra ad clear, and then we pop down the Death Trap, sucks everything in, everything blows up, and because we use our Death Trap with Preparation, we have both of our imbuements back already, and then we can just spam them again with basically no cooldown, and then while we are spamming, we're even further reducing the cooldown on our Death Trap, so we basically just have this gameplay loop of dashing in, popping one of our imbuements, either Cold Imbuement to increase our single target damage, or Shadow Imbuement to increase our AoE damage, pop the Death Trap to pull everything in, to get everything to instantly explode, and then also give us our imbuements back if we need to absolutely burst something, and then we have dash for the extra mobility. A lot of you guys may be wondering, why are we not using Shadow Step anymore? It's our only unstoppable. What happens if you get CC'd? If you get CC'd, you're not very happy. Unfortunately, that is kind of just how it is. You can mitigate this by having a lot of just survivability with the build, and if you feel very crippled without using Shadow Step, I would recommend just taking one of the imbuements off, either Cold Imbuement, which will nerf your ability to just do a lot of raw damage, but then you have the Unstoppable, or you could just take off Dash. Personally, it's actually been fine. When you're doing easier content, you won't really die in a CC. You lose a bit of mobility, but I wanted to try something else out. You could lose Death Trap, but Death Trap is a really big part of the build, and combo points plus Inner Sight really do not work well at all when you're using the Wrathful Heart or the Barber, so that is a reason for this. Another thing people ask a lot is why no Poison Imbuement. The reason for this is that the Heart of the Barber, you want to do damage in a very short burst window. You want the enemies to instantly die and take advantage of all of the damage conversion there, and poison damage over time is for 5 seconds and then 6 seconds with the buff. So you get very low value out of actually using this because it's damage over time that you want to scale over time, and you want all of your damage to be in a very short burst window. So ultimately, this is a skill set that I would recommend. Puncture is good for just the vulnerable. You don't really need it all that often, but we are mainly using Puncture to proc 20% damage reduction here, and we're also using it to proc close quarters combat, which you do have very good uptime on, even with the way that Barber works, making enemies immune. As long as you make sure to just use your Puncture right off the bat, you effectively have 20% attack speed and 30% multiplicative increased damage at all times. An alternative option for survivability is Momentum, and you could take off Puncture or something, but overall the value is very high in my opinion. We are using Wrathful Heart of the Barber, and I want to talk about the caveats with this real quick. For those of you guys that aren't interested, just skip past this part. You do not need this heart in order for the build to actually function. Quickly, for our other hearts, we are using Trickery, and we're using the additional crit damage. Trickery works very well when we're using one of our legendaries to just dash. We drop down the smoke grenade, it instantly dazes everything, but also we get the shadow clone for the additional survivability kind of. It just taunts everything. It's pretty nice. You don't really have a lot of other options. Another option is you basically take 20% less damage. I would recommend that one. Again, they'll be posted over on the website, but the Heart of the Barber is the most important one. It is a Malignant Heart. These guys are dancing around me for some reason. You don't need this to function, for the build to function, but you get it at tier 3. The way that this works is essentially when you hit an enemy and your hit is a critical strike, all damage that you deal to that enemy will say it is immune, but after the 3.5 seconds or whatever your roll is, all the damage that you did is accumulated, and then it is turned into a big AoE explosion. Something that's very worth noting about this is that if you actually deal the amount of damage that mob has in health, it will prematurely cause the explosion, so you don't have to wait the 4 seconds. So if I hit a mob that has 100 health, I deal 500,000 damage to it, it'll instantly explode, okay? Even if I did 100 damage, as long as I did the amount of damage that mob has in health, it will explode early. So ideally you want as long of a roll as possible. You want it to be 4 seconds. so that you get more value out of the stored damage is increased by 15% per second, but it also gives you more of an opportunity to do a lot of burst damage in this short window because Twisting Blades inherently has like a delay, so you want to do all this damage in a burst window for mobs that are very, very tanky, such as elites. Unfortunately, Barber also has some downsides in the form of when the enemy is actually immune, a lot of effects just do not work. So for example, when they are immune, a certain lucky hit effect, such as Siphoning Strikes, it's not going to proc because the enemy is literally immune. There's a ton of like weird intricacies. Some things work, some things don't. I'm not smart enough to tell you all of them. I don't think there's a single person on this planet that knows all of the very specifics when it comes to the Barber because it's kind of just spaghetti code, to be honest with you. Certain things work, certain things don't. The main thing to note is that lucky hit effects have very low value anymore when the enemy is actually immune, because when they're immune, they're not really getting hit. Also, you have problems with vulnerable application because puncture, when they are immune, is not going to apply vulnerable. Same thing with close quarters combat. If the enemy is immune and then you puncture them, it does not count as damaging them because they are then immune. Again, there's inconsistencies with this. There's weird things. More people will figure it out. It also seems like Barber just increases your damage output to a capacity that doesn't entirely make sense, so it could be using different multipliers multiple times, and honestly, it's spaghetti code, so it could end up getting patched, but it massively increases our overall damage output, and the value that we get from this is just so high that it's just simply too good to not use it. The main downside of this is that when you are fighting single targets, your damage is going to be a little bit low because it is difficult to reapply vulnerable to that individual target, and also things like Inner Sight just basically get entirely bricked. The main thing that is relevant to understand is basically we just care about doing as much damage in this window as humanly possible so that we get as much of a return on that massive AoE explosion as we can, and also we just want to avoid a lot of on-hit sort of effects because they effectively are dead. Some of them still work technically, but their value is significantly lowered. So let's get into the skill tree now that we've talked about all of that. I might make a separate video talking about it once everybody knows like everything about the heart, but for the purposes of the build, I've kind of figured all of that stuff out, so don't worry too much about it. When it comes to our basic skill, we want puncture with the vulnerable application, even though it does not work all the time. If the Barber explosion happens and then you immediately throw the puncture and none of the blades hit or crit, it will apply the vulnerable. The chance of this is pretty low, but it's like 1 point to invest it, so may as well. And sometimes I take the Barber off when I'm fighting bosses, so it's still good to have. Twisting Blades with the cooldown reduction here. Cooldown reduction is massive for the build to reduce the cooldown on our Death Trap. And then I go 3 points into Sturdy and 3 into Siphoning Strikes. Siphoning did get massively nerfed, but honestly, we don't have a lot of healing with this build. There's an alternative way to get some healing, and I'll have a survivability section timestamped for the video if you guys are interested. Siphoning Strikes, it's not going to proc that much, but because Shadow Movement does so many different instances of damage when you're like blowing stuff up, and Barber does blow up multiple mobs at a time, I've tried playing without this and with it, and you do get some value. The value is way worse than it used to be, but it is still worth the points. In my opinion, the only thing that you lose to go into Siphoning Strikes is basically you lose some movement speed. So it's up to you if you want to gain the movement speed / attack speed, which is actually quite good. It's kind of just a personal preference sort of thing. But for speed farming and stuff, I think the healing is still good. Weapon Mastery for damage, Dash for the slow and crit damage debuff, and then I actually go 3 points into Agile, which again is a pretty optional survivability choice here. You could reallocate this into Haste for like speed farming purposes if you don't feel like you need the dodge chance. 3 into Exploit and 3 into Malice for overall damage. Shadow Movement for the vulnerable application, which is amazing, by the way, with the way that Barber works, and you just get crazy value out of Shadow Movement overall. I accidentally had 1 point to Shadow Movement, so I'll put that point into Cold Movement. It actually doesn't really matter. Maybe I'll keep it there. Who cares? 3 points into Consuming Shadows for massive energy return, which again seems to work with all Barber explosions almost. So you get crazy energy with this. Basically, when you kill something, boom, you get your energy back. Precision Imbuement, because we're using 2 Imbuments for the extra crit chance, which is amazing. Basically, our goal is to have the majority of our attacks actually be imbued. Cold Imbuement, fantastic for just increasing our overall damage. You freeze enemies near instantly, and when an enemy is frozen with Frigid Finesse, you do 60% increased damage, but also you deal 20% with Cold Imbuement baseline, but when they're frozen, it's 40%, but that 40% actually turns into 64% when you're using the Corruption aspect, because it increases the potency of the damage value that you get from that. So that is very good. Trap Mastery for 12% crit chance anytime we pop down our Death Trap. It's conditional, not active all the time. Still worth it in my opinion, but again, you could reallocate that instead to Adrenaline Rush and Haste for movement speed / energy / attack speed, which is really good. Aftermath is also great because anytime we pop down the death trap, it's typically after we just bursted a lot with our Shadow Imbuement and our Cold Imbuement. So we instantly get another 90 energy that we can spend so that we can just do like 3 Twisting Blades. And then after those 3 Twisting Blades, we basically have like, 7 Twisting Blades going off. After those 7, we're going to have everything explode, and then we'll get all of our energy back with Consuming Shadows. And then I have Close Quarters Combat, which is just a massive damage increase. Alternatively, you can go Momentum for damage reduction if you need more survivability, which I'll talk about in the survivability section of the video. When it comes to your legendaries here, again, all of this will be posted over on the website. The main thing is that you want Twisting Blades on your crossbow for the additional value. This just makes you do significantly more damage. And because I'm not using Shadow Step, we have the damage legendary on our amulet option now, so we're using Corruption to just increase the damage of our Shadow Imbuement as well as the potency of our Cold Imbuement so that it instantly freezes enemies, and also you get way more damage against frozen enemies as a result. It is not mandatory. You could alternatively go for something else, such as a damage reduction sort of legendary, which I'll talk about. On your rings, you want a Ravenous and a Umbral. This is a little bit redundant because you do have so much energy regen, and my energy was kind of fine without an Umbral. But ultimately, I'm stacking so much attack speed with using Ashiar's Conjar and Accelerating Aspect, and with attack speed on my gloves, and with attack speed via Close Quarters Combat, that the more energy, the better, so you can just permanently spam. And as you're able to spam more and more, you proc the Barber Heart faster, so you can just get through maps faster, the faster attack speed that you have, and the more energy regen that you have. Eventually, if you feel like your energy regen is so good, you could eventually take Ravenous off, and you could go for something like Edge Masters for just straight up additional damage. Our last legendary is going to be the Quickening Fog, so that we get the Smoke Grenade after we dash, and this is great when you pair it with the heart. I forget what this is called. I think it's Trickery. Basically, you dash, you instantly daze everything that you dashed into, and also it's going to spawn a little guy that's going to taunt everything, which will bring all the mobs in, but it also is very good for survivability because the mobs pretty much will just ignore you. Alternatively, you can use the heart that gives you 20% damage is suppressed for some survivability, and then you could instead go for Edge Masters or just more damage on here. The reason I'm using Ashiar's Conjar is because I like the attack speed and the movement speed after killing an elite. Granted, this does nerf your overall damage because having a sword with vulnerable, crit damage, dex, crit damage, etc. is just going to give you more damage. The attack speed I found to be pretty nice. Not 100% sure on what I feel here. I would highly recommend you guys just try it out, see how you like it. If you feel like your damage is worse as a result of this, obviously take it off. But if you are like me, you like the attack speed, it just speeds up the build, right? Because more attack speed equals more uptime on preparation, and that equals just more imbuements, which is kind of in a way more damage, right? So I like it. Usually I hate this thing because the stats are terrible, but for this build, I would recommend it. Penitent Greaves is amazing for just instantly chilling. Actually works decently to get mobs frozen quicker for more value with Cold Imbuement and Frigid Finesse. Also, because it's just instantly applying crowd control, it gives you more value with like Umbral Ring, for example, and you just do a lot of extra damage to crowd controlled. So Penitent is, in my opinion, mandatory, but if you don't have this, it's okay. Just use a normal pair of boots, and you can actually put Quickening Fog on the boots, and then you could do like Edge Masters instead. Again, more legendary options will be over on the website. And then for your defensive legendaries, you want to have Aspect of Cheats, Disobedience, and Basic Skills give you damage reduction. This is overall a lot of damage reduction, and if you want to make yourself more survivable, the single most important thing is to have all 3 of these damage reduction legendaries. This is drastically going to increase your DR, but also getting good pants, good chest is crazy for you. Getting damage reduction versus close, armor, max HP, overall DR, as well as getting DR versus close on your pants, etc. That's huge for your survivability overall. If you feel like you are still dying despite having all 3 of these things, one of the things that you can do, which is basically going to solve all your survivability problems, is basically you just play without close quarters combat and you go into momentum. The reason for this is it gives you 20% damage reduction, but there's also a legendary called, I was having a real hard time finding this, Aspect of Stolen Vigor. Basically each stack of momentum passive is going to heal you, and you get 3 stacks of momentum. So basically you get 300 times 3, which is 900, but if you put this on an amulet, which is where you'd want to put it, in tandem with all these legendaries, you just put it on here, and then you just lose Accelerating or something like that, or Quickening Fog. You could put this on the amulet. Actually, I'd probably lose Ravenous if I were to lose something. Not sure, but I'd slam this on the amulet, and that would just give me a crazy, crazy amount of healing, and it basically just heals you to full, plus the DR that you get from momentum, plus 20% DR, crazy amount of DR with your chest piece, and also 25% with cheats. you become pretty much invincible. So if you need survivability, highly recommend doing that. It is kind of insane, but honestly, I like having, the big damage overall. When it comes to the stats that you want on each piece, for your helmet, getting cooldown reduction and total armor is very good. Outside of that, you can get max HP for more survivability. Ranks to Shadow Imbuement and Ranks to Cold Imbuement is very good offensively because it just increases the damage of Shadow Imbuement, and the Ranks to Cold Imbuement just increases how much it chills, so it's nice for just freezing enemies near instantly, but it is kind of optional. I kind of just like it, but it's definitely not needed. You could go for max HP instead. On the chest, you want damage reduction from close first, straight up damage reduction, armor, and then max HP. My chest actually sucks. I need a new one really badly. On the gloves, you can get ranks to Twisting Blades and crit chance. Those are the two most important things. And then crit damage with imbued skills is very good for overall damage. Attack speed is very nice, but a bit redundant because you already have so much. So instead of attack speed, I'd probably get trap skill cooldown reduction to have death trap more often, which kind of just results in more overall damage because then you're spamming your imbuements more. Pants, same as chest, DR from close. Armor, max HP. I got DR from poisoned. We are not poisoning enemies. This is just because I rolled this like 1,000 times, and I'm going to use a poison build at some point, so may as well. It's like a pretty good roll. Penitent Greaves, of course, and then you want a crossbow. The crossbow, you want exactly what I have. My rolls kind of suck, but you want vulnerable damage, dexterity, crit damage, and then all stats. The reason for all stats is because you have so much additive damage that it is better than having damage with core skills, but also the way that I have the Paragon board set up is I am basically, as a result of getting these all stats, I'm getting 15% crit damage, 16% damage to elite, 100 armor, and also 12% damage to close enemies. So all of the additive damage that I would otherwise be missing by using this all stats is instantly made up by having all those requirements met in the Paragon board. And then I can allocate Paragon points otherwise to get even more additive damage. And the all stats by itself gives me nearly 80 dex, which is just 8% damage, as well as a decent amount of int, which is just crit chance. So all stats is goated. Outside of the all stats, you could just get crit damage with imbued skills. I would recommend getting all stats once you're like level 90, but before 90, probably go for core skill damage, damage to close, or you can get crit damage with imbued. What is this mob? What is this guy wigging out about? Jeez, okay. For the weapons, a lot of people ask swords or daggers. This is the only time that I think daggers are actually better than swords with this build. The reason is that daggers actually have faster attack speed. They have a 1.2 as opposed to a 1.1. But also, daggers have the added benefit of weapon mastery working for them with damage to healthy multiplicatively as opposed to swords. This is why I would actually recommend swords usually, but because of the way Barber works, the enemy is 90% of the time healthy when you hit them because the explosion hasn't happened yet and they instantly went immune. So it's 15% damage versus 9%. Also, they drastically nerfed the crit damage on swords, so the damage to close isn't even that bad, and the attack speed kind of makes up for it anyways. Right now I have two swords. When it comes to the swords, you want exactly this roll here. Vulnerable damage, crit with imbued, dexterity, crit damage. When it comes to the daggers. Just use whatever you get that is a higher item power. 10 item power, I think, if I remember my math correctly, I think it's about 4% overall damage. So if something's only a 10 item power increase, but you're losing 20% vulnerable damage and, 20% crit damage, the stats are going to be better for you. Has to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, but generally, item power is pretty important, but getting at least vulnerable damage and dexterity is going to be more important for you. And Ashiara's Conjure, I think, is particularly good for the attack speed, like I mentioned. On your rings, you want crit chance, crit damage, vulnerable damage, and crit damage with imbued skills. If you want survivability, you can get max HP. As you can see, my rings absolutely suck because I'm missing vulnerable damage on this one, so that's, minus 20%. And I'm also missing crit damage with imbued skills on this one and on this one. So my damage could, be like 20, 30% better. That's a little unfortunate for me. When it comes to the amulet, this one I'm very happy with if the rolls weren't literally min roll. Cooldown reduction is fantastic just for death trap, but not mandatory in my opinion. Damage reduction from close is amazing. You can get like 20% on the amulet. Alternatively, you can get just straight up damage reduction as well, or straight up armor. That's a great way to get more survivability. Movement speed is fantastic for just speed farming. And when it comes to what ranks you want, I would recommend ranks to Frigid Finesse because you do freeze enemies quite a lot, and you do instantly chill anyway with Penitent Greaves, so you do get value. Alternative to that, Exploit is actually good because it gives you damage to healthy, just 18%. But getting Weapon Mastery is also good, or Malice is also good. In terms of order of priority, I'd probably go Frigid Finesse, Exploit, weapon mastery, malice, but not 100% sure, to be honest with you. This is what I like, but at least get the ranks of something and like movement speed or DR. It's kind of personal preference, to be honest with you. When it comes to the Paragon board, this will be posted over on the website. The more important things to note is that when you are leveling, this exploit weakness board will actually be no witness, so that you can instantly slot in the exploit glyph for the guaranteed vulnerable application, which still does work. Sometimes it's finicky with Barber, but 90% of the time, everything you're fighting is going to be vulnerable, and the 40% vuln damage from this is just too good to pass up anyway. So keep that in mind. For the first glyph, I'm going for Closer, mainly for the damage reduction here. I don't really get a lot of dex because this glyph kind of sucks. My board is focused on a lot of survivability with damage reduction, scattered all over the place, and a lot of armor. You could take out damage reduction and go for way more damage, but the damage is already pretty insane, and damage reduction is very cozy, so I can do like tier 70s, 80s without having too much of a big deal. First glyph, Closer. Second glyph is going to be Combat for extra crit damage. I get a lot of vuln here, damage reduction from vuln. Cheap shot board is the best board Rogue has. Crazy amounts of damage and crit damage to crowd controlled enemies. You can get damage to healthy, which works very well with the Barber Heart. It has a huge int board, and you can use that with control for just overall extra damage. Damage reduction versus elites, very good. And then I go into Tricks of the Trade. Oh my god, that scared the crap out of me. Someone rang on my doorbell. You can get damage versus close, and damage to close enemy, or damage reduction from close and damage to close enemies. You can get damage to elites, crit damage up here, and I slot in turf for damage reduction and more damage. And then I go into the last board. Pretty crappy stuff here, but there's a good amount of armor, and I just slot an exploit because there's a ton of strength. Again, all of it will be posted over on the website, so feel free to just check that out. When it comes to actually playing with the build, one thing that you want to note is that basically oh my god, the Avenger makes these guys do a lot of damage. The quill rats are scary, bro. One thing you want to note is that dashing in is pretty good because it spawns a decoy and it instantly dazes. Outside of that, you want to instantly apply puncture for the damage reduction, as well as damage reduction there, as well as the close quarters combat buff to get that rolling instantly. Outside of that, you want to rotate your imbuements first and then pop the death trap after you've used both of your imbuements. Which one you want to use first depends. If there's like a really tanky elite, you want to use cold imbuement first to instantly freeze them. If there's just normal mobs, you don't even really have to use both imbuements. You kind of just want to use shadow imbuement like I just was there, and you don't really want to waste the death trap. But when you find like really tanky elites, you just want to go in there. Basically, you dash, puncture, and I'll show it right here. You dash, puncture, cold imbuement, 2 twisting blades, shadow imbuement, 2 twisting blades, death trap, and then double imbuement again, and then everything should just instantly die. I'll show you guys a quick representation of that. This is a pretty good representation right here. Everything just gets obliterated. And as you can see, I still have my shadow imbuement active. Those guys literally were just like not even playing the game the whole time right there, and that's generally how you want to play with the build. And having the taunt is pretty nice as well. And a lot of people complain about having like carpal tunnel because there's so much attack speed. You're just like spamming. I'd recommend just holding down the right click rather than just spamming if that's a problem for you. But keep in mind that your attack speed is very, very quick, so you can rotate between your double imbuements like really, really fast. One thing is that the build doesn't have unstoppable, so if we get crowd controlled, it's pretty scary. You can use topazes to help kind of mitigate that fact. When you're doing stuff that's like at your level, it's really not that hard. Like even there, you can just like dodge forehead some of the crowd control effects. But honestly, I've kind of just accepted my fate. If crowd control decides to be really cringe, I just blame the game, and and that's it. I just kind of deal with it. But as you can see, I mean, with a Barber even being a 4-second roll, everything does die instantly. This is a room where it's really scary. I'm taking a crap load of damage, kind of spamming the health pots. But siphoning strikes, as you can see, it does pop, and stuff does die very quickly. I got a pretty bad like death trap suck there because I was scared of like the cold immunity and stuff. And Avenger is pretty scary in the 74 with really tanky mobs. I'm kind of surprised I didn't die. But if I wasn't being stubborn and I just put on momentum, I'd probably have no problem. I just like the extra damage with close quarters combat. The attack feels really good. But that's pretty much it for the build though. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.